Welcome once again to Everyday Holiness, a Faith ND podcast brought to you by the Notre Dame Alumni Association. This is again your host, Dan Allen, Associate Director of Spirituality and Service, and I thank you for joining us today. I'm pleased to be joined today by Kristin Komyatte Sheehan, a 1990 graduate of Notre Dame, got her Bachelor's of Arts in Theology. She also continued on in 1993 to receive her MA in Psychology, and she now serves as the Program Director of Play Like a Champion Today, which obviously has some Notre Dame connections, so we'll get into all that. But Kristin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Dan. It's such a pleasure to be here, just sitting right under the dome on a beautiful, sunny summer day.
That's right. We are blessed. So we'll start at your beginnings. Tell us about some of the essential details of your early life.
So I grew up a cradle Catholic. My father was a 1959 Notre Dame grad, so coming to Notre Dame several times over the course of a football season was really part of our family experience. I remember happily and excitedly helping him pack the cooler before the night before a football game, and we'd be waiting to go and excited to go. And so Notre Dame always factored into my life. And I had the opportunity when I was going into high school. I have an older brother and a sister as well. Mm-hmm. And my brother was at Notre Dame, but he wanted to transfer to Georgetown because he was a debater. And they had a really high-quality debate team there. And my sister had not been accepted to Notre Dame. And so my dad was sad. He wasn't going to have anybody at Notre Dame. And I wrote him a letter, and I was going into high school. I said, Dad, I promise I'm going to do all I can in high school to earn a spot at Notre Dame so I can follow in your legacy.
Yeah.
And fortunately was able to do that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, sometimes we're cradle Catholics or cradle domers. Depending,
absolutely,
depending,
that's
and
right.
Other people come to it, both those things later in life. So in terms of your upbringing in faith, what do you remember being important to your family about living your faith out each day?
So my father, again, he used to carry me to bed when I was a little girl, and we would say prayers together, and he'd kneel by my bed, and we'd say the traditional Our Father, Hail Mary, Glory be, Angel of God, and it was really pivotal and soothing and a routine that was rooted in our faith. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that we continued on with our kids. And of course, going to Mass every Sunday. That was a really important family outing every Sunday. And I don't ever remember not wanting to go. Most teenagers go, why do I have to go? I don't ever remember because it was a joyful event for me to be part of that and to give that hour to God. My mom also, she taught me a really important faith lesson. And it was, if you have to do something hard that you just don't want to do, she would always say to me, offer it up. Mm-hmm. Offer it up, Chrissy. They call me Chrissy. Mm-hmm. And that's a simple yet very powerful lesson, I think, about faith and God. And offer it up for everybody that isn't able to do what you're doing, and offer it up as a penance for when you've not done your best. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yep, there's a lot of wisdom in that for sure. I know that sports play a role in your story. As a young person, where did sports fit in? What do you remember being kind of enjoyable about those?
So my family, they were all swimmers. My brother and sister were on the swim team, so my parents put me in swimming. And I reached 8 and under, I did okay. And then when I got to the 9 and 10-year-old age bracket, I'm very short. And I started getting creamed. And I said to my mom and dad, I want to do something I'm good at. And I was doing gymnastics just occasionally. And I said, I want to do this more. I want to be a gymnast. And so being a gymnast was a big part of my identity. And that, of course, helped me to then earn a spot on the cheerleading team when I was a student here at Notre Dame. Mm-hmm,
mm-hmm. I think there's something about, past listeners of the podcast will know I like to talk about sports and spirituality, and there's a lot of crossover there, I think, in terms of the discipline and the routine, and one is aimed towards obviously a temporary goal, one more of an eternal one. But how did those two interplay in your life? I mean, sometimes they can come into conflict, but how did your discipline towards sports and also your prayer life, how do those interact?
Yeah, that's interesting. You say sometimes they can come into conflict. I think in our world, sometimes sports can become like an idolatry, and it can be all important, and we forget that we're children of God. So sport and spirituality is something that I think a lot of people aren't really familiar with. And so I'll talk to you in a little bit. I'm sure you'll ask me about the Play Like a Champion educational series, but we train coaches to recognize God's presence in sport. That God isn't some faraway deity that's floating above us in the heavens, but God is within and among each of us. And when you bring together a team, there's God present in that team and those relationships, in that commitment to each other. And we tell coaches, just raise awareness that God is present among that team, and that through that presence of God, they can be strengthened. They can be stronger in difficult times. They can celebrate God's presence in moments of triumph as well.
Absolutely. As you grew as a child, you talked about, okay, maybe swimming's not my thing, but I'm having more success in gymnastics. Just overall, what did you discover some of your God-given talents were as a young person that helped inform some of the future decisions you would make?
Oh, that's a good question. I think number one, hard work. Sport is hard work. It can be very grueling. And yet through the hard work, you grow and you become better. And that's faith too. I'm going to say faith is never grueling, but you got to commit to it.
Yeah.
And you got to work at it. When you think about, I'm reading this book on Jesuit spirituality, and they're the finding God in all things.
Right.
And talking about the examine, and this woman talks about how you've got to put the time into your prayer life in order to build that relationship with God. We spend time with our spouses, our children, our friends, and by that time spent in quality relationship, you grow in closeness. And that's so true about prayer, right? We've got to put that time in.
And of course, sometimes there are those moments of carrying the cross and Calvary in the spiritual life and otherwise. Where did your strength and courage to overcome some of those moments come as a young person?
Right. So certainly there is challenge in our lives, in all of our lives, and for some people more than others. And my go-to prayer is the Hail, Holy Queen. So Mother of Mercy, she's a mother, which right there, that imagery is loving, kind. Mother of Mercy, our life, our sweetness, and our hope. And this is my favorite part. To thee do we cry, poor banished children of Eve. To thee do we send up our sighs, mourning and weeping. In this valley of tears. Right. This is a valley of tears sometimes. and then it says, we turn to you, our advocate. And there's such power and strength in that. I often think about the imagery. I just close my eyes and imagine Mary cloaking me in her mantle. And that color blue, I'm looking at this beautiful blue picture here, the blue sky and the golden dome highlighted against the blue sky. I just imagine that blue is warmth and kindness and gentleness and grace and mercy. And that's sustaining. That's uplifting, even through the valley of tears.
Well, and of course, even in our university seal, life, sweetness, and hope, they're there. And so I think so many people have drawn inspiration from that over the years. As it relates to Notre Dame, you talked about your dad went here. You made him this promise. When you got to that point of ending high school, were you still that certain that Notre Dame was the best fit for you?
Absolutely. I applied to Notre Dame and St. Mary's. And I was coming to South Bend for sure, one way or the other, either way. I think I would have liked St. Mary's very much as well. My daughter ended up going to an all-girls school, and she found it to be a very empowering experience. And my daughter-in-law is a St. Mary's graduate, and she loved St. Mary's. So a wonderful school. So I'm sorry, I forgot the question. Was I still certain as a high school student?
Yes.
Absolutely. Couldn't wait to get here. And when my dad took me to get my carpet for my dorm room, you know how you call your roommate, and in those days you actually phoned each other, right? I said, well, I'll get the carpet because we've got this place called Carpetland. And my dad and I drove to Carpetland. We got our carpet, and he played. We had the cassette tapes in the 80s. So he popped the cassette tape in, and I knew the Victory March already for sure.
Yeah.
But he didn't know the alma mater yet.
Right.
And of course, that's what we dedicate to Mary, Notre Dame, our mother, right? And so we drove around my little town of Munster until I knew the alma mater. And one of the jokes was at our cheer team, we sing arm in arm, you sing the alma mater at the end of the game.
Right.
Not everybody knew the alma mater. And so our coach said, you have to sing it. You can't just listen. You have to say it. So they used to say if they didn't know the words, they go, watermelon, watermelon. And I thought, can't you just learn the alma mater?
Right, yeah.
Let me teach you. This is what we're dedicated to here.
You might be on TV doing this. Come on now.
That's right.
So once you got to Notre Dame, sometimes expectations versus reality, that can be a little bit different, or making Notre Dame your own after having it been part of your family legacy. So what was that like in your early time as a student here?
I mentioned I have a brother and sister, and actually they both ended up coming here. My brother came back from Georgetown, and my sister got in off the waiting list.
Okay.
So all three of us are Notre Dame graduates. And so I did a lot of what they had done that they enjoyed, because I would listen to them when they would come home, and they were both very involved in the Center for Social Concerns. And so I got involved in that right away. Social justice was very important to our family. And so my parents encouraged me in that regard as well. And so I did a lot of volunteering. I took classes through the center. And that was really a big part of my identity, because when I was here, you couldn't cheer as a freshman.
Okay.
You had to wait until spring of your first year to try out. And so I had that whole year to get used to college life and being away from home. Although my parents came to all the games, so I got to see them quite a bit.
That's great. And in terms of cheerleading, was that something you did in high school and wanted to continue in college?
I did do it in high school somewhat, but it was gymnastics that really helped propel me to be able to earn a spot on the team. And so I absolutely knew I wanted to cheer at Notre Dame, 100%.
And I know sometimes that works out for people and sometimes it doesn't. Can you talk about some of the anticipation of whether you'd make the team and maybe some of the disappointment of others when they didn't?
Yeah, and it's hard. And in those days, it was still, after tryouts, they put a sign on the door on the jack, and your name was on it or it wasn't.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people burst into tears, and it's sad. It is sad to see your friends who you've been practicing with all those, like, it's months. There are clinics that go on for months before tryouts so that you can be prepared. And then the tryouts come and they do 2 cuts, at least when I was here. And I'm sure it's different now, which the cheer coach now is terrific. Delana Meyer, she's amazing. She's been very supportive of our work at Play Like a Champion. But in the days I was here, there were only 7 couples. And now we've got 3 squads.
Right.
So it seems like it's expanded and there's more opportunity.
Yeah. I remember that my wife and I were both in the marching band, and we wouldn't have as extensive tryouts, but, that posting the list. And I remember once they read a letter from a student who had tried out 3 years in a row and not made it. And she just said, never forget the privilege that it is that you get to do this. And I remember that always stuck with me. So as you finally got out there and were starting to cheer at these events that you had watched as a child, what was that like for you?
I mean, it's just an incredible feeling. Like you said, you won't understand what it is to march with the band, to hear the band right next to you, and to look up and see the roaring crowd all rallied around this school that you love, dedicated to Mary. It's just it's indescribable experience of incredible opportunity and gratitude to be in those shoes. I can feel it today. You can almost feel it in your soul.
Yeah. Yeah, coming out of that tunnel, it's like nothing like else like you've experienced in your life.
That is so true. And we used to, and they still do it now, we would line up in front of the tunnel. And we would be hand in hand, to be boy, girl, and you would hear the players behind you, and their cleats were hitting on the concrete. And they're getting all revved up, and you're revved up. And then all of a sudden, go, and you run. And I don't think my feet touched the ground because we were running so fast, because you didn't want to get run over.
Right, yeah. It's like, don't trip.
That's right.
And obviously there were other elements to your Notre Dame story as well. What do you remember as you went through things that also became important to you, besides maybe the Center for Social Concerns, cheerleading, anything else that really, as you look back now, you think, those were pivotal moments or pivotal things that I did?
Yeah, so our dorm, I was in Lewis Hall. We were chickens. And in fact, we're having a reunion this year for the Navy weekend, because Lewis was the first dedicated dorm for women.
Right.
and it was for women religious when
Right.
they would come for graduate studies.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So there's beautiful history there. So my dorm had Mass Monday through Thursday, 10 p.m., and I was a frequent evening Mass goer with my roommate, and who I sponsored her to become Catholic, which is exciting. And
Yeah.
that was a really special time to have that happen, to be someone's sponsor. And we would go to that evening Mass, and it was either Father Green or Father Flanagan. And so we really got close to those two beautiful priests. And it was such a powerful experience to just sit in the back of the chapel. And it was usually about 10 of us. Around that numbers was very small, and you just sat together and had the experience of Mass. That was pivotal and powerful. I also like to go to the 11:30 Mass at the Basilica and invited many people to join me before we would have lunch. And then, of course, the grotto, right?
Yeah.
We all know the grotto and what that means to all of us.
Yeah. And as you decided on your field of studies, you chose theology. So how did that come about? What were you hoping you would be able to accomplish doing that?
So it was my Theology 101, first semester, my first year. And I had Larry Cunningham, who ended up being the chair of the department. And he came up to me before class one day and he said, "Have you ever thought about majoring in theology?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, I'd like to invite you to consider that." And so through that invitation, it opened my heart. And I thought, well, why wouldn't I do that? I found it very interesting. I did go to a Catholic grade school, but I went to a public high school. And so I enjoyed very much studying theology and learning, and the incredible department we have. The professors here are really world renowned. And so that was a no-brainer through that invitation. I'm like, yes, I'm going to say yes to that. And then I did also get 2 minors in gender studies and in peace studies. And so that brought along my interest, my passion for women's issues and equity, and the desire to strive for equity, and also the social justice agenda with the peace studies.
Yeah, yeah. And then as you get towards the end, were you thinking about graduate school right away, or how did that come about?
Yes, I knew I would want to go to graduate school, but my husband and I got married, and then we both worked he was already been working because he's 3 years ahead of me.
Okay.
But we worked for another year, and then we went to graduate school.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. And as you were discerning that call to marriage and you're ending your time at Notre Dame, I know sometimes there can be a pressure there. We call it ring by spring or whatever other names, but it's just sort of like, okay, we're going to have to make a major decision here to keep going, or this might have a natural end to it. So what was that like for the two of you?
So I met my husband, Dan, inadvertently through cheerleading. So on Wednesdays, I don't know if they still do this, but we did the Wednesday lunch fast, so that if you gave up your lunch on Wednesdays, they would give the money for your lunch to hunger relief.
I remember that, yes. I did that.
Right. And so I would always go to the library, the second floor, on Wednesdays at lunch, and I would just take a piece of fruit from breakfast or whatever. And I saw my husband-to-be kind of walking around the second floor, and I spotted him because he had on this jacket, and we used to call them billboards because the back said Irish cheerleader, big, huge letters, a big shamrock. And I was kind of staring at him like, oh, there's a cheerleader, because I knew that was something I wanted to do and was very interested in. And so he was with a friend, and the friend goes, "That girl's staring at you." And he turned and he caught me looking at him, and I put my head down, and then he came over and I said, "I'm sorry, I was staring at you. That was really rude of me." I said, but I see you're a cheerleader, and I really want to try out for the cheer team. And so that's how we met. And our first date was to go to lunch, but I asked him, like I said earlier, would you like to go to Mass first at the Basilica? And so that was really our first date, was Mass at the Basilica.
Yeah.
And we later got married there 3 years later in 1990. But he was a senior when I was first year.
Okay.
So he moved home to Florida after he graduated and was trying to move back up because we missed each other, of course. And so he got back up here in March of my sophomore year. And so he was here working. He was a civil engineer. And so he would often say, well, let's get engaged. And I say, I don't want to be engaged before my senior year. It wasn't a ring by spring. It was just not before my senior year.
Okay, yeah.
And knowing my husband, I would have known what he would choose for the engagement, because he chose the biggest platform he could choose. It was on the field at the first home football game my senior year.
Oh, my goodness.
Notre Dame versus Michigan State. And that was when they still let airplanes fly, and they would fly with messages. But he was going to fly an airplane with the Kristin, will you marry me? But it was too windy that day. So instead, my roommates and he spray painted on a sheet, Kristin, will you marry me? And they held it up in the stands. And my coach led him onto the field, and he got down on one knee and proposed. And we were on Monday morning, we were in the front page of The Observer with a picture. It said, "Sporty and Smitten," which we framed and we have now hanging in our house.
Yeah. That's a great story. I always ask my wife, like, do you want me to ask? Sometimes they do it at the baseball games or something on the Jumbotron. She's like, no way. She's like, even if I say yes, I'm going to say no in that moment. Don't embarrass me that way. So you gotta test that out.
When you're a cheerleader, you're not embarrassed to be in front of a lot of people. You can't be.
Well, that's great. So as you figured out early married life and decided to go to grad school, how did you kind of discern those things together then as a married couple?
So Dan wanted to change his career. He was a civil engineer, and he felt called more to a business world. So an MBA made sense. And I knew I wanted to get a master's, but I applied to both theology and psychology. Mm-hmm. And ended up having the opportunity to get into both schools. And it was a hard decision. But I thought, okay, I've got my undergrad in theology, so let me diversify and go with psychology for the master's.
Mm-hmm. And what area of psychology were you particularly interested in, and what did you hope to maybe do with that master's degree?
The program at that time was counseling psychology. So they trained us to be therapists. And I thought I probably would stay. And I worked at a counseling center in Ohio. It was my first job. And I thought I would stay. But of course, God has different plans, mm-hmm. right? And my husband got moved we were in Toledo, Ohio, and he got moved up to Detroit. And so as I was thinking about my next move, leaving the therapy world, there was the opportunity to work for the Archdiocese of Detroit. And I was the assistant director for the Office of Life and Dignity.
Okay.
And so that came up, and God directed me into the church, and I've pretty much been working in the church ever since.
Well, I know that calling, so there's a special nature to that. And then you mentioned your children. When did they come along, and what were some of the blessings and challenges of those years?
Yeah, so as soon as we were out of graduate school, we had Shannon, and she's our oldest, and she is a 2016 ND grad and got her master's from the University of Michigan in sociology. When she was applying for her graduate programs, she's going down the list, and she says Michigan, and my husband says, "You can't apply to Michigan." She's like, "Dad, it's the number one school in sociology," and that's where she ended up going. So, but we did kind of feel that way,
right? Well, don't root for the football team.
We're moving her into her graduate school apartment, and she's got like 25 Notre Dame sweatshirts. I'm like, "Do you think you're going to wear all these here? It's fine with me. Just you can't buy any Michigan apparel." So my son Jack came along in 1997, and he also is a Notre Dame graduate, 2019. And fun fact, that when he was here, he was a leprechaun.
Great.
And so you get two cheerleaders who marry, they get to have a leprechaun.
There you go.
It's a beautiful thing. And we had a great time following him around. And he was here the year we were undefeated. He was the leprechaun that undefeated season. And so that was a really fun. Of course, we lost in the playoff.
Yeah.
And then my son, Danny, he wanted to play sports in college. And he ended up at D3 school, DePauw University, which is in Greencastle, Indiana. And he played baseball and football for all of the years, except he missed a COVID football season. Mm-hmm. Yes, he missed that. But we had a great time learning and experiencing a completely new university, beautiful university, DePauw. Love going there.
Mm-hmm. And I know sometimes as a young mom, you're trying to juggle both career and motherhood. How did you strike that balance? What did you learn about yourself during that time?
I did always have some type of side work. So I always had a little bit of a professional outlet, which I believe helps you to stay rooted in an identity that isn't just mom. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, choosing largely to stay home with my kids was an opportunity to step back and find the identity really as a child of God. Because you don't live in the shoes of a counselor or in the shoes of a program director. You live in the shoes of being just a child of God. And so finding your true identity in that was an opportunity I had really experienced as a stay-at-home mom.
And of course, there's something very spiritual in parenthood about putting your needs behind your children's needs, especially when they're young and helpless and need quite a bit, that I think it's not always easy, but approaching it from a spiritual lens, I at least found helpful. You get a bit more insight into God's perspective and love towards you. Did you experience that?
Absolutely. You stand in those shoes of an unconditional parent, an unconditional love, no matter what happens with your kids. And that is what God is for us. How beautiful that you get the opportunity to serve your children in that light.
And I know that also sometimes your children's failures, you feel them in an especially acute way, but also their successes. I feel like you're never more excited than when you see your kids do something well. So what was that like for you as you saw your kids understand their own God-given talents and gifts?
Right. So just allowing them to be them, right? And not putting who you are on them is what I would say I really tried to do. Now, I did put all of them in gymnastics.
That was familiar territory.
But that wasn't when they wanted to do a different sport, then they do a different sport,
sure.
right? And so I think just, letting them find who they are and making mistakes along the way. Like you said, those stumbles are heart-wrenching sometimes as you watch your children fall, but letting them fall and just holding their hand while they stand back up on their own probably is the hardest but most important thing we can do as parents.
And of course, you talked about your dad's hope that you would come to Notre Dame. And I think sometimes that's a hard thing for our alumni, is how much do you hope for your children to come to Notre Dame, but also how do you allow them to find their own path? And sometimes it's increasingly difficult to get into Notre Dame, and everybody wants it to happen and it doesn't happen. So what was that like for you in terms of you have some of these hopes for them, but you also want them to find their own path?
So my youngest son wanted to play, like I said, baseball in college. And so people would say to him, "Oh, your parents aren't going to let you apply to anywhere but Notre Dame." And I said, "Of course we are." You do have to let them choose. It's their life. It's our college days. We had our opportunity, and just love and support them in their choices. And then you get a whole new experience from that. And it was like I said, it was really fun to experience a new university and to allow him to pursue his passion and his path.
Yeah.
Fortunately, my older two, actually my daughter, she applied to several Ivy League schools, and her first choice would have been Dartmouth. And that was harder because that was our oldest. It was harder to let her do that.
Yeah.
But we did.
Yeah. And of course, there comes that time as children get older, they get busy with their own things, they start to light out on their own, and there's a bit more time in your schedule to make some choices about going back to work or increased volunteering. In those years, how did you come to some of those decisions about making that transition back to the workforce or doing some other things?
As you say, volunteering, I did an awful lot with my kids' schools. And my husband used to say, "You should get a full-time job because that would be less work than you do as a volunteer."
That's right.
And then we'd have some income from it, he'd tell me. So it was an easy transition for me because my husband's in sales, so we've moved a number of different times. And usually when the kids are growing up, pretty much every 2 years we'd find a new home. And we had just moved back here to South Bend when our youngest was going into all-day kindergarten. And so for me, it was just a natural transition. Like, okay, I'm back in South Bend. I'm going to go over to Notre Dame and see what I can do. And it was a football weekend, and one of my Notre Dame roommates was back, and we were eating pizza after a game, sitting on my boxes still, so we had just moved back. Husband wasn't fully unpacked. And she goes, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Well, I'll go over to campus and see what I can do for Notre Dame." And she said, "You know what? My niece just graduated, and she helped a professor start this sports program. And I think you might be good at something like that. And I said, well, who's the professor? And she said, Clark Power. And my husband and I laughed because Clark and Ann Power were our host couple when we did pre-Cana here on campus before we got married.
Wow.
And so we would go in the summer of 1990, we would go to Clark and Ann Power's house and talk about marriage and what an intimate experience that is and deep sharing. And we absolutely loved the Power family. They had 2 little kids at that point. And so I said, oh gosh, I know Clark. So I picked up the phone on Monday and I called Clark. I said, I don't know if you remember me, but I heard you're doing something. I'd love to come over and hear what you're doing. And he said, come on over. And we sat in his office and he shared with me how he had just begun the Play Like a Champion Today educational series, which is a program. It's an educational clinics for coaches and sport parents to elevate the culture of youth and high school sports. And so he had just started that June in 2006, and he had 2 partners, the Dallas Parochial League and the Los Angeles CYO. So he's telling me what he started and then his vision for the future. And I said, well, in order to get to that vision, I think you need more partners. And it sounds like you need a parent workshop because he only had the coach clinic at that point. And he said, yes, that's what I need. Can you help me with that? I said, I can help. And we've been in partnership ever since. So we're completed our 19th year. We just had our 20th annual conference. We were celebrating. And to date now, we've provided our trainings across the country to over 180,000 coaches and parents. And we know from our research around our workshops that athletes who have coaches who are Play Like a Champion trained are happier, they're healthier, and they stay in sports longer. And so we feel what we're providing is critical for youth, that they have this space where they can play and enjoy the play and grow from the play. Not only as better athletes, of course, we want people to grow physically, but we are intentional in our trainings to help athletes grow socially, emotionally, morally, and spiritually through the sport experience.
And what was Clark's motivation in getting this started? And how has it evolved over time as youth sports have evolved and the reality that we are in this year versus when it started? Yeah, it's a bit different.
So it rose out of, he was coaching his kids at Holy Cross Grade School here in South Bend. And he noticed things that really surprised him and upset him. He said, this shouldn't be part of a youth sport culture. One of them was he had a 5th grade girls coach. He had 15 girls on the bench, and he played 5 girls, the same 5 girls the entire game. And he thought, this is 5th grade. These are 10-year-olds. This should not. Everyone should be in there equally. Sure. And we do advocate very much for equal playing time at the elementary level for sure. And then he actually had to break up a fight between parents in the stands one Sunday afternoon. So he thought, okay, this should not be happening in youth sport. And so he did what professors like to do. He did a research study and he published it. It was called Youth Sport Behavior, and the subtitle was The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. And so we hear it all the time, well, sports builds character. But there's no anecdotal evidence or data that says just putting on a uniform helps you become a better person or develops your character in a good way. And in fact, the research showed that based on what's modeled in the environment by the adults, so that's the coaches and the parents that are in the environment, kids can learn poor character. Sure. And so he said, look, we know sports can be great for kids. So let's do something intentional to make sure kids are getting the good out of the sport experience. And so not only does the coach clinic teach coaches how to model positive, virtuous behavior, but it also gives them tools to be intentional about uplifting the kids and building virtue into them as they coach.
That's a beautiful objective and so needed. As you saw your own kids entering into sports, were there some lessons that you brought as a parent of kids in sports that helped inform what you were doing with Play Like a Champion?
Absolutely. So when I came on with Clark in 2006, one of my first 2 tasks was to write the parent workshop. So when I would go to Christ the King to watch my kids play basketball, that was my laboratory, right? I just took it in and observed. And parent behavior can be, although parents do this in a well-intentioned way, they often are very distracting to the athletes and can actually harm the environment. For instance, even just sometimes cheering, just overly cheering, can be very distracting to the athletes. Certainly, coaching from the sidelines is very distracting, and it's really disrespectful to the coach because that's the coach's role. And so one of the things we say to parents is just love and support the whole team, not just your child, the whole team, and cheer for the whole team. So we have what we call guidelines for sidelines, and we make it pretty clear what's not helpful. My husband, we were cheerleaders, right? So he would often, lots of cheering, and he was very positive. But my youngest son would say to him, Dad, don't say anything. Because it could distract.
Right.
And if you hear your dad always yelling, even if it's in a positive way, that can be very distracting to some kids. And each child is different, of course.
Yeah,
You've got four, so you know
different
they
temperaments.
respond differently. Yes. So we would literally not say anything for our youngest. And he played all the way through college. And it's his game. Our playing days were over.
Yeah.
So let him play and let him run the race on his own.
And you talked about playing time, and that can be a sensitive topic, especially between parents and coaches. And oftentimes parents are hoping for more playing time, and coaches are making sometimes different decisions. How do you help parents and coaches navigate those conversations and have a mutual perspective about that?
Well, it really depends on the grade level. So if we're talking to parents of high school athletes, we would say, first of all, you feel upset about playing time. Maybe ask your child how they feel about their playing time. Because it's, again, parents can get swept up in the emotions of sport. And maybe the athlete has been told by the coach where they stand, and they understand why they're in that position. And so we first say, ask your child if this is something that's concerning to them. And then secondly, if it is, it's the athlete, the high school athlete, that should talk to the coach. It empowers that athlete, and it's their journey. And so they should always be the one to talk to the coach. Now, at the grade school level, that's obviously different because it's harder for a young person. I would say even in middle school athletes can talk to their coaches and should talk to their coaches first before the parents would jump in. And so at the younger levels, we talk about talking. If you're a parent, you want to talk to your child's coach, first you wait 48 hours because you're typically going to talk to them because you're upset.
Right.
And so waiting 48 hours, you can see it in a less emotional light, and always approach and talk to the coach with great respect. The coach has a really difficult job. They're trying to manage a whole team of kids, and they're usually concerned about they should be concerned about everyone's growth and development. And so to approach it with respect and never out of anger.
And both as a dad and a coach of a lot of youth sports, I keep flip-flopping my own perspective and questions on this, but from the coaching side, how do you encourage coaches to not think about winning at all costs, but to think about this emotional and spiritual, physical development that you want for every member of the team, even the ones who might not be as skilled or athletic?
Right. So we emphasize the cardinal virtues. So what you're talking about is the virtue of temperance. So it's being able to put everything in a proper measure and balance things. And so, of course, we strive to be victorious. That's the social contract of sport, right? To be the winning team or the first runner to cross the finish line. Of course, we're striving. And yet we need to employ that virtue of temperance and put issues of character and overall development over the process, over the pure outcome.
And sometimes, a lot of times, it's the process and commitment to that leads to better outcomes than solely focusing on the winning.
That's absolutely right. If you stick with that journey and you lean into the process and you focus on the whole development of every one of your players rather than just the outcome, you're going to help those athletes to grow as whole people and as better athletes.
Right. What concerns do you have as an observer of youth sports culture right now, where you feel like Play Like a Champion today continues to be a need and need to have a voice in the climate of youth sports today?
So there is a very huge injustice in youth sport today, and that is the pay-to-play sport culture. The youth sport industry is $38 billion industry. And so when and why did we decide to profit off of a child's game? And we believe that it's a child's right to play, and that every child should play, not just those whose families can afford them to play or those who are talented. Every child should move and run and have the privilege of calling a team their own. And so we, probably 10 years into our existence of Play Like a Champion, we saw this reality of pay to play increasing and growing. And just a personal example, when our boys were young, they played baseball here in South Bend at Clay Baseball. And it was a neighborhood park, and kids from the neighborhood could just walk over, and kids from lots of different areas joined together. And it was maybe $30 to sign your child up. And it was a wonderful experience. The dads were the coaches, and we had a great time at Clay Park. Well, we were getting ready to move. I told you we move a lot. And that summer, at the end of that summer, the buzz was going around that, oh, you don't want to play in this league anymore. You want to go play in this travel league. And they're having tryouts. Well, we moved to St. Louis, and what happened over the next 2 years, Clay baseball ended because the families who could afford to go to the travel leagues, they went and they tried out and they joined other leagues. And so Clay baseball now becomes not a thing. And we saw this happening in really more of our inner cities across the country, that the recreational, that were low cost or free programming was ending. And so not only were kids sitting on the bench, they didn't have a team at all to play for. So we started what we call a team for every child. And we started in North Lawndale, which is on the west side of Chicago. And we sent 2 Notre Dame students to North Lawndale for the summer. And one of them was my son. And so it was this incredible experience where he lived in the community and he visited with all of the providers of sport in North Lawndale. Now, the Chicago schools do not offer sports in their schools in that community because they cut them. It was too expensive.
Right.
And so we rely on the individual providers of football or basketball to give those experiences to the kids. And my son went and he interviewed all of those providers, and he found that these were beautiful people. We tend to refer to them as the saints. They're the saints walking around North Lawndale and actually bringing children in from the streets to their basketball gym, inviting them into a safe space where they can have fun. They can be mentored by a coach who is a trusted adult. And it saves lives. It saves lives. And so what the results of the needs assessment were, these programs were doing wonderful things, but they were struggling to keep going because they didn't have all the resources that were necessary to do what they do best. So we proposed creating an association, and then we call it the North Lawndale Athletic and Recreation Association. And we encouraged each partner to come together as part of an association and to keep data, to keep track of who they were serving, and to tell the stories about how it turned kids' lives around. And then we were able to pull all of that data together and prove the collective impact for a community for the children by all of the providers. And so that's been really powerful. And in North Lawndale, we're 10 years in now to our association. We've increased access to sports and children playing by 400%.
Wow. That's tremendous results, and hopefully a replicable model for other areas.
You're absolutely right, Dan. So our second site is here in South Bend. We call it the Michiana Athletic and Recreation Association. And just this year, South Bend also only had sports in middle school and high school. So this year we were able to pool resources and hire a young man as basically athletic director for the elementary schools. And so across all the elementary schools here in South Bend Community School Corporation, there are now 6 sports being played throughout the year. And that means 3,000 children who weren't playing last year played this year in their school. And it's so important to have them in their school because then you remove the barrier of transportation.
Sure.
So they have practice following school. And that also incentivizes kids to come to school because we do have a truancy challenge here in South Bend schools. And so if I get to play after school, I'm more likely to come to school and want to come to school.
Yeah. And I think what you talked about, the pay for play, sometimes parents feel boxed in terms of, well, there is no rec league, or the rec league that I see is just barely hanging on. So I guess I have to make the decision to do travel sports or pay for play. And then that really, I've seen, changes a family's whole dynamic of when they can go to church, or how much money they're spending in travel and hotels and tournament fees and all that. So how would you encourage parents who feel a bit trapped in that and torn, that we don't think this is what we want to do as a family, but we want sports to be a part of our kids' lives?
So our Catholic schools do still offer really a robust sports programs, and that's a wonderful place for children to play. And I think you're right. Parents come up to me all the time after our parent workshop, like, well, in order for our child to make the high school team, we've got to do this.
Yeah.
They do feel trapped. And so we say, just break the trap. Just break the trap. And in fact, the research shows that if you specialize in a sport at too young of an age, it's actually adverse to the athlete's overall development because of overuse injuries. And 50% of youth injuries in sport are due to overuse. So those are preventable. And then also burnout, because young minds aren't ready for that intensive practice and play. And so to play multiple sports, we encourage that, and also not to train so deeply and too much that it burns the child out or gets them injured.
Yeah.
In fact, the U.S. Olympic Committee created the American Development Model in 2014 because what they found was we were not getting the biggest pool of elite athletes who were trying out for the Olympics due to our youth sport culture. Because we were specializing people too soon, we were losing athletes to reaching that elite level. So they created the American Development Model, and we teach that. And that it goes by age and maturity, and you don't go too fast. And you also focus on the fundamentals. You don't have really elaborate plays for little children. And think about it. When I cheered here, our coach, she had uniforms from several years back in a garbage, like in a big black garbage bag. And she said to us, okay, go in the bathroom and figure out who wears what. And we figured it out. We traded around. This one's better for me. This one's better for you. And we had a little team experience there. And now, fast forward, when my daughter was in cheerleading as an 11-year-old, they made her a custom fit uniform, and it cost me like $500. And I thought, oh my goodness, she doesn't need this custom fit uniform, right? To just enjoy the sport. Right.
Yeah, sometimes those things, it's like, what are we doing here? What have we become? I asked you earlier about the crossover between faith and sport and those cultures. Where do you think faith has a role in what you do at Play Like a Champion today? And what are some of the tenets of faith that can help give us that better perspective of the value of sports, but also the limitations of sports in one's life?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, Dan, we go with the cardinal virtues, and those are the virtues in our Catholic Catechism. They were brought into the Catechism by Thomas Aquinas, and they're the virtues that equal a moral person. And so we help coaches to build into those virtues. And the virtues, they're cardinal, which means hinge. And so every other value kind of hinges around these cardinal virtues, and they're prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. And so when you think about each of those values in sport, you also, they're moral, so they relate to your faith life as well. And so when you think about fortitude, it's hard work, it's determination, it's courage to keep going. And we need courage through our faith to say, this is difficult, Lord, help me through this challenging practice, or help me to manage this injury and have the fortitude to come back from it. When we think about justice, that's about the relationships on the team. Am I a good teammate? Do I support my fellow teammates? Am I listening to my coach? Am I coachable? These are all about the justice, and that's fairness and respect. Am I a positive opponent? Do I thank the officials after the game? And again, that's rooting us in that virtue of justice. And then prudence is about decision making. If we allow children a choice and voice in their sport, we're empowering them to make good decisions. And then finally, temperance. We've already talked about keeping winning and losing in perspective.
Mm-hmm.
We also talk about the theological virtues in sport, faith, hope, and love. In fact, at our 20th annual conference this year, it's a 3-day event. We dedicated each day to a theological virtue. And so faith is the foundation of all we are and who we are. And that's foundational. Hope is a beautiful sport word. It's an anticipation of building God's kingdom right here on your team in this world. And then love is an action word. How will we love each other on our team? And then not just on our team, but how do we take those lessons that we learn from sport and serve our community?
That's very well said. And speaking of conferences, I know that you had the chance to go to the Vatican to a conference and meet Pope Francis. Give us some details of how that came about and what that was like.
So the Vatican has an office for sport. It's part of the dicastery for laity, family, and life, and it's called a sports section. And Clark, Professor Power, has been involved with that section from years and years ago. And so we were invited in 2015 to attend a conference there called Coaches, Educating People. And we had the opportunity to share our research and our findings from our work here and meet people from all across the world trying to elevate sport so that it is all that it can be for athletes. And then in 2018, the Vatican produced a document called Giving the Best of Oneself. And it was an article, a 32-page document on the value of sport in our world. And also cautions on how sport can go overboard and can be harmful, and a goal that sports should be for all. And that led to a conference where I did get to go to the Vatican called Sport for All. And it was actually the first conference Clark and I went to was on an offsite property, but this was actually in the Vatican. And so when you see Pope Leo saying hello to everyone in that hall, that's where we were.
Right.
And so that was absolutely phenomenal. And I was invited to moderate a panel, and it was with Special Olympics and 2 Paralympic athletes talking about how we do need to make sport accessible for differently abled folks. And so that was really, it was such a privilege. It was so special. And to be in that room knowing that sport helps us to become more fully human and closer to God. And Pope Leo's come out, well, you know he's a White Sox fan, right?
That's right.
He's come out and he's had some quotes on sport already.
Yeah.
And so we're hopeful and excited to see what he will continue to say about sport. My favorite Pope Francis quote on sport is, sport provides a culture of encounter. And encounter is what we do. We encounter our teammates. We encounter opponents because opponents allow us to excel. We strive. The term competition comes from the Latin culmen petra. It means to strive together. And so that's what the opponent isn't the enemy. The opponent helps us to rise up and become our best. And so we're excited to see what he'll have to say about sport, continue to say about sport.
Yeah. Well, I think it's such an important point because sometimes people do feel like sports and faith are opposed, or if you care about sports, there's no reason you would care about faith or religion. But I think as you're talking about, a really integrated life has both of those things, both our physical fitness and well-being, but also our spiritual well-being as well. So in terms of that, those are elements, I think, of holiness and the discipline and the coaching and all those things that help you in a holy life. Who have been some of the people that you've looked up to that have really helped you in your faith life?
So certainly my parents, they're both passed now, but in their passing, and I feel them in my heart daily, and I hear them reminding me of things. So they're saints to me. They're with me all the time, and they'll carry me through challenge. And so they were my pivotal. My husband helps me in my faith life. And so he's a model. He's so supportive of me. He's my biggest cheerleader for sure. And so together we strive to grow in our holiness. So at that conference at the Vatican, we did get to be greeted. We got to greet Pope Francis. And so I kind of feel like I knew him.
He had that way about him, just being familiar to so many.
Exactly. And my husband went with me to the conference, and we have our photos with the Pope. And he he is mimicking our expression. So he looks different in each of the photos, and he's mimicking how we're greeting him. And so he's an inspiration, especially since he was so involved in sports, and that's my field. So I often will go to his quotes and will read his writings. And so he is an inspiration. I do really value the Jesuit spirituality, and I am inspired by the Examen. And I try to remember to pause each day to do the Examen. And then people who I really were inspired by at Notre Dame that stay in my heart were Father Green and Father Flanagan, who we shared the Eucharist with on a very personal level, and Father Don McNeil from the Center for Social Concerns. He married us, and he was very influential in my life. His book, Compassion, is still one I go back to and will read frequently. And I try very hard. I fall short every day, but if we can live our life with full compassion and always try to stand in the shoes of the people that we're engaged with, I think we're trying to live Jesus's way.
And of course, as the years go by, I think it's such a gift. You carry bits and pieces of people with you and wise words that they've said, and it comes back and inspires you. They continue to be a gift, even from heaven. What have been some of the practices for you that have been really effective in staying close to those ideals of those people who've inspired you, staying close to God and striving after a holy life?
Certainly the Eucharist, certainly Sunday Mass is pivotal, and being involved in our parish. We're on the Social Justice Commission, and we just serving our community. So last night we monthly go over to Dismas House, which is a home for formerly incarcerated people, and walking together in the community is really a faith. And so making sure we take time to do that. And every morning before I even put my feet on the floor, I read the Faith ND. And Faith ND, so thank you for doing that.
It's a group effort.
It is. It's beautiful, and it's always so well written. But I also read from the USCCB, I'll read the first reading and the responsorial psalm. And from either the reading the psalm or the gospel in Faith ND, I'll pull, it's kind of like the Lectio Divina, where you read it slowly and what comes out to you.
Right.
And what comes out to me from there, I'll put in a text to my family. We've got our family chat.
Yeah.
And I call it the DP, the daily prayer.
Love it. And
sometimes it's one word, sometimes it's quite long. I don't know if my children actually read it. But that gets my day started well. And then another practice is one of gratitude. And so beginning my day with gratitude, and when I put my feet on the floor, I say thank you as I step down. Thank you. And then my mom had a prayer that she taught. I think she started doing it more when when she had the grandchildren, and she would gather them all together in the family room when they were home for Christmas, and she taught them. And it's a full body prayer. So you raise your hands up above your head and you're saying, thank you, God, for the day. And then you bring your arms out in a T like you're in the cross. And you say, I ask you to let me have compassion for all my brothers and sisters. And you bring your arms out in front of you and you say, and I offer all to and for you, Lord. And then you bring your hands in a cross across your chest and you say, and I desire union with you in my heart. And then you bow and you say, and I bow to you in adoration. Wow. And so the ritual practice of that helps me to begin my day in that deep gratitude and offering all of that day to God. And then I try to end the day in the Examen. To say, where were you, God? Where did I see you? Where did I fall short? And where can I find you tomorrow? So yes.
Yeah. Well, that's a beautiful list of little practices. And I love that final question because you get a little bit different advice from everybody. And I think collectively we're building each other up. But I want to focus on gratitude here as we end. Thank you for obviously coming on today, but for what you're doing. I think you and your organization are doing such an important thing right now in youth sports to encourage a positive and virtuous use of sports in our lives and guarding against some of the excess or the unintended consequences of what sports can bring, and really being a positive force for good, as we often say, especially to those who are disadvantaged and not able to play sports. So thank you for all that you're doing in there and for sharing a bit of your life and faith with us today.
Well, I appreciate the gratitude. I embrace it, and it fills me up. So thanks so much, Dan.
All right. Well, that concludes this episode of Everyday Holiness, a Faith ND podcast. As always, we invite you to like, to rate the podcast, to share it with those who you might think really benefit from hearing these stories, and to subscribe to it. And Kristin mentioned our Faith ND Daily Gospel Reflection. You can sign up for that at faith.nd.edu/signup, and you'll get that reflection every morning, as well as notification of future episodes of the Everyday Holiness podcast. Until next time, you'll be in our prayers. Thanks for joining us, and God bless.